The cargo vessel Starward Hope moved slowly through the darkness of the Vela Expanse in the year 2347, and its crew had no idea that this night would change everything they knew about the universe. Captain Jack Morrison sat in his chair on the bridge and watched the stars drift past the main view screen, and he thought about the simple delivery job that had brought them to this remote corner of space. And he wondered why anyone would want supplies sent to such a cold and empty place. The Vela Expanse was known throughout the galaxy as a region where no intelligent species wanted to live. And the temperatures were too low, and the resources were too few, and the loneliness was too heavy for most beings to bear. And yet someone had paid good money to have cargo delivered here, and Jack was not the type to ask too many questions when the credits were right. Lisa Grant sat at the communications console, and she was young and eager, and she had only been with the crew for 6 months. But she had already proven herself to be one of the best signal analysts Jack had ever worked with. And tonight she was running routine scans of the local frequencies, just to pass the time during the long journey. Ben Harper was down in the engine room, where he spent most of his days and nights keeping the old ship running with spare parts and creative solutions and a stubbornness that refused to let any machine die on his watch. And he was singing an old song from Earth while he worked on a faulty power coupling. Grace Owens was in the medical bay organizing her supplies and thinking about her daughter, back on the colony world of New Haven, and counting the days until she could see her again and hold her in her arms and tell her stories about the stars. Nathan Cole was at the pilot controls, and he was calm and steady as always, and he guided the ship through the asteroid fields with the ease of someone who had been flying since before he could walk. And he trusted his instincts more than any computer navigation system. It was a quiet night, like so many other quiet nights on the Starward Hope, and no one expected anything unusual to happen. Then Lisa heard something that made her blood run cold. She adjusted her headset and leaned closer to her console, and her fingers moved quickly across the controls as she tried to clean up the signal and make sense of what she was hearing. And her face went pale, and her eyes went wide, and she called out to the captain in a voice that trembled. Jack turned to look at her, and he saw the fear in her eyes, and he stood up from his chair and walked over to her station and asked her what was wrong. Lisa told him that she had picked up a signal on a frequency that was not used by any known species, and that it did not sound like a transmission or a distress beacon or anything she had ever heard before. And she said that it sounded like a cry. Jack told her to play it on the bridge speakers, and she did. The sound that filled the bridge was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced, and it was not a word or a message, but something deeper and more primal. And it carried within it a pain so profound that Grace came running from the medical bay, and Ben stopped his singing in the engine room, and Nathan's hands froze on the controls. The cry echoed through the ship like the voice of something ancient and wounded and desperately alone. And it seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone who heard it and touch something that words could never describe. Jack stood in silence for a long moment, and then he told Lisa to broadcast the signal to the nearby vessels and ask if anyone could identify what had made it. The responses came quickly, and they were all the same. Salvari trade ship told them to ignore the signal and continue on their way, and to forget they had ever heard. Ida Kavathi patrol vessel changed course immediately and fled the sector without any explanation. A Morven science station went completely silent and refused to answer any further communications. Jack looked at his crew, and he saw the confusion and fear on their faces, and he knew that whatever had made this sound was something the rest of the galaxy wanted nothing to do with. And logic told him that he should follow their example and leave this place and never look back. But there was something in that cry that would not let him go. He had heard pain before, and he had heard loneliness before, but he had never heard anything like this. And it was the sound of a being that had given up all hope and yet still reached out into the darkness because there was nothing else left to do. Grace spoke first, and she said that whatever made that sound was suffering, and that she could not, in good conscience, walk away from something in that much pain. Ben came up from the engine room, and he said that he did not care what the aliens thought, and that he had not signed up for a life among the stars just to run away when someone needed help. Nathan said nothing, but his hands moved on the controls, and the ship began to turn toward the source of the signal. Lisa looked at Jack and waited for his decision. Jack thought about all the times in human history when people had faced the unknown and chosen fear over compassion, and he thought about all the times they had regretted that choice. And he thought about the kind of captain he wanted to be, and the kind of human he wanted to be, and the kind of example he wanted to set for those who would come after him. He gave the order to trace the signal to its source. The starward Hope moved deeper into the cold darkness of the Villa expanse, and the crew did not know what they would find, but they knew that they could not ignore a cry for help, no matter what the rest of the galaxy said. And somewhere in the void ahead of them, something ancient and wounded sensed that it was no longer alone, and it felt the first stirring of something it had not felt in a very long time. It felt hope. The starward Hope traveled for 6 hours through the asteroid field before the sensors finally detected something massive ahead, and Nathan called everyone to the bridge because he could not believe what he was seeing on his screens. Jack stood at the view screen and watched as the shape slowly came into view, and his breath caught in his throat, and he heard Grace whisper something that might have been a prayer. The creature floating in the darkness was nearly 300 meters long, and its body was serpentine and covered in scales that shimmered between deep violet and silver as the light from distant stars touched them, and great wings that seemed to be made for sailing between worlds hung limply at its sides like torn curtains, and its eyes were closed, and its movements were slow and weak. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing Jack had ever seen. Lisa pulled up the Galactic archives and searched for any record of a creature that matched what they were looking at, and after several minutes, she found a file that had been buried deep in the database and marked with warnings in a dozen different languages. She told the crew that the creature was called a Jalvine, and that the rest of the galaxy called them star dragons. And she read from the file with a voice that grew quieter as she went on. The Jalvine were an ancient species that had existed long before most of the current galactic civilizations had learned to walk upright, and they had traveled between stars by riding the solar winds, and they had fed on the radiation of dying suns, and they had never harmed any intelligent species in all their long history. But the Galactic Council had feared them because of their size and their power, and the fact that they could not be controlled. And 300 years ago, the Council had declared them a threat to galactic peace and ordered their extermination. The Korvathi had led the hunting parties, and they had tracked down the star dragons one by one and killed them without mercy. And the files said that the species was believed to be extinct, and that no living Jalvine had been seen in over 2 centuries. Grace looked at the wounded creature on the view screen, and tears ran down her face, and she said that they had to help it. Ben asked how they were supposed to help something that big with a cargo ship and a medical bay designed for humans. And Jack told him that they would figure it out because that was what humans did. Nathan moved the ship closer, and they could see the wounds that covered the creature's body. And some of them were fresh and bleeding, a luminous golden fluid that floated in droplets through the vacuum, and some of them were old scars from battles that had happened long ago. And the creature looked like it had been fighting and running and suffering for a very long time. Jack ordered Nathan to use the tractor beams to gently guide the creature toward the cargo bay, and Ben ran down to reconfigure the space and make it as warm and welcoming as possible for their unexpected guest. Work took hours, and it was difficult and dangerous, but the crew did not complain because they could all hear the creature's labor breathing through the hull of the ship, and they knew that Time was running out when the cargo bay doors finally opened, and the Jalvine drifted inside. The creature stirred for the first time since they had found it, and its massive eye opened slowly and looked at the tiny humans who stood before it. Jack had expected to see anger or fear or hunger in that gaze, but what he saw instead made his heart ache in ways he could not explain. The eye was ancient and wise, and filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch back through centuries of loss and loneliness. And there was no hostility in it at all, and there was only exhaustion and pain and a fragile flicker of something that looked like hope. Grace stepped forward without hesitation, and she placed her hand on the creature's snout, and she spoke to it in a soft and gentle voice and told it that it was safe now and that they were going to help it and that it was not alone anymore. The creature made a sound that was different from the cry they had heard before, and it was softer and warmer, and it seemed to carry gratitude in its depths. Ben worked through the night to modify the medical equipment so that it could treat wounds on a scale he had never imagined, and Grace directed the healing efforts with skill and compassion. And Lisa monitored the creature's vital signs as best she could with instruments that were never designed for this purpose. And Nathan kept the ship steady and warm and hidden from any vessels that might be searching for them. Jack stood watch over it all, and he looked at the Star Dragon, and he wondered how the galaxy could have been so afraid of something so gentle and so beautiful. The creature's scales were cool to the touch, but they gave off a faint warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. And Ben started calling it Ember because of that warmth, and the name stuck as the hours passed and Ember's wounds began to heal under Grace's care. The creature's eyes followed the humans wherever they went, and there was wonder in those ancient eyes, as if Ember could not quite believe that these small beings had come to help when everyone else in the galaxy had only ever brought pain. Jack sat beside Ember in the cargo bay during the quiet hours of the night cycle, and he talked to the creature, even though he did not know if it could understand him. And he told Ember about Earth and about the oceans that covered most of its surface, and about the mountains that touched the sky, and about the billions of humans who lived their lives beneath the stars without ever knowing that creatures like Ember existed. And Ember listened with an attention that made Jack feel like his words mattered more than they ever had before. The wounds were healing, but the deeper scars would take much longer to fade, and Jack knew that saving Ember's body was only the first step, and that saving Ember's spirit would require something more than medicine. It would require connection and understanding, and the one thing that Ember had been denied for centuries, it would require friendship. The days passed slowly on the Starward Hope as the crew worked to understand their extraordinary guest, and Ember worked to understand them in return. And what began as a rescue mission became something far more meaningful than any of them had expected. Lisa spent hours trying to establish communication with Ember, using every translation program and linguistic database she could find. But the universal translator could not recognize anything the creature said, and the sounds Ember made did not match any known language in the galactic archives. It was Grace who finally discovered how Ember truly communicated. She was changing the bandages on a wound near Ember's neck when her hand brushed against the smooth scales, and suddenly her mind was filled with images and emotions that did not belong to her. And she gasped and stumbled backward, and Ember made a soft sound that seemed to ask if she was all right. Grace told the others what had happened, and Jack asked her to try again. And this time she was prepared for the flood of sensations that came when her skin touched Ember's scales. The images were vivid and powerful, and they told a story that words could never capture. Grace saw a universe filled with star dragons, sailing through the cosmos on wings of light and feeding on the warm radiation of ancient suns. And she saw families and friendships and a culture that valued peace above all things. And she saw the joy of flight and the wonder of discovery and the love that these magnificent creatures had shared with one another. And then she saw the darkness. She saw ships with weapons that burned hotter than stars, and she saw the Kovati hunters who showed no mercy, and she saw the star dragons fall one by one until the sky was empty and the songs were silent. She saw Ember watching her mother die, and her father die, and her siblings die, and her friends die, until there was no one left but herself. And she saw the centuries of hiding and running, and the loneliness that was worse than any physical wound. Grace pulled her hand away, and she was crying, and she could not speak for a long time when she finally told the others what she had seen. The cargo bay was silent, and no one knew what to say, because there were no words that could address such profound loss. Ben was the first to move, and he walked over to Ember, and he placed his hand on her scales, and he closed his eyes, and he tried to send something back. And he thought about his own life and his family and the music he loved. And the joy of fixing things that were broken. Ember's eye widened, and a soft glow rippled across her scales, and she made a sound that was almost like laughter. One by one, the crew members touched Ember and shared their memories and their feelings with her. And they showed her the beauty of humanity and the love they carried in their hearts and the hope that had brought them to this cold corner of space. Jack showed her the ocean at sunset and the feeling of sand between his toes and the sound of his grandmother singing in her kitchen on Sunday mornings. Lisa showed her the excitement of decoding a new signal and the thrill of discovery and the satisfaction of solving a puzzle that no one else could solve. Nothing showed her the freedom of flight and the trust between a pilot and his ship and the stars as seen through human eyes. Grace showed her photographs of her daughter and the fierce, protective love that a mother feels for her child and the promise she had made to always come home. Ben played his old music on a portable speaker, and he watched as Ember's scales changed color in response to the melodies. And she seemed to understand that this was how humans shared their emotions. When words were not enough, the communication grew stronger over the days that followed, and Ember began to understand human speech, even though she could not produce the sounds herself. And she would respond with patterns of light that the crew learned to read like a new language. Lisa created a translation system that converted Ember's bioluminescent signals into words on a screen, and for the first time in centuries, the last Star Dragon could truly speak to someone who would listen. Ember told them about the hidden places in the galaxy where the last remnants of her people might still be sleeping. And she told them about the dreams she had when she was young and the future she had imagined before everything was taken away. And she told them that she had sent out her cry into the void, expecting nothing because no one had ever answered before. She said that she had wanted to die, but she was afraid to die alone. And so she had called out one last time, hoping that someone would hear her final song. And then the humans came. Ember did not understand why they had come, because no one else in the galaxy would have risked their lives for a creature like her. And she asked Jack why humans were different from all the other species she had encountered. Jack thought about the question for a long time, and then he said that he did not know if humans were special or if they were just stubborn, but he knew that when he heard her cry, he could not walk away because helping others was what gave life meaning. He said that humans had a long and complicated history filled with both cruelty and kindness. But the best parts of humanity had always been defined by the willingness to reach out to those in need, even when it was difficult or dangerous. Ember listened, and her scales glowed with a warmth that filled the cargo bay, and she said that she had lived for over 500 years and traveled to countless worlds, and she had never met a species quite like humans before. Grace's daughter appeared on a video call that night, and the little girl saw Ember on the screen, and her eyes went wide with wonder. And she asked if she could give the dragon a name. Ember agreed, and the little girl thought very hard, and then she said that the dragon should be called Ember Starfire because she glowed like an ember, and she belonged among the stars. Ember's scales rippled with colors that no human eye had ever seen before, and she made a sound that was pure joy. And the crew of the Starboard Hope laughed and cried at the same time because they knew that they had done something wonderful. But they also knew that the peace could not last forever. Somewhere in the darkness, the Korvathi were still hunting, and sooner or later, they would find their prey. And when that happened, the crew of the Starboard Hope would have to make a choice that would change everything. The alarm that woke the crew on the seventh day was the sound that Jack had been dreading since the moment they found Ember. And he ran to the bridge with his heart pounding in his chest and his mind racing with fears he could not name. Lisa was already at her console, and her face was pale, and her hands were shaking as she reported what the sensors were showing. And Jack looked at the view screen and felt his stomach drop. A Korvathi battle group had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and there were 5 warships in total, and each one of them was larger and more powerful than anything the Starboard Hope could ever hope to fight. And they were moving toward the cargo vessel with weapons already charging. Nathan ran the numbers and reported that there was no escape route because the Korvathi ships were faster and their weapons had longer range, and they would destroy the Starboard Hope before it could reach the nearest jump point. Ben came up from the engine room, and he looked at the screen, and he said words that would have made his grandmother wash his mouth out with soap. And then he asked what they were going to do. Grace was in the cargo bay with Ember, and she had already told the Star Dragon what was happening. And Ember's scales had gone dark with fear and sorrow because she knew what the Korvathi were capable of, and she did not want her new friends to die because of her. Communications console lit up with an incoming transmission, and Lisa put it on the main screen. And the face that appeared was cold and hard and belonged to a Korvathi commander named Vexinar, who spoke in a voice that carried no emotion. At Al Vexinar told them that they were harboring a dangerous creature that had been condemned by the Galactic Council, and that they had 1 hour to surrender the Jalvin or be destroyed alongside it. And he said that there would be no negotiation and no appeal and no mercy. Jack asked Vexinar why the Korvathi were so determined to destroy a creature that had never harmed anyone. And Vexinar replied that the Star Dragons were a threat to the order of the galaxy, and that some species were simply too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The transmission ended, and the bridge was silent. Jack looked at his crew, and he saw the fear in their eyes, but he also saw something else. And it was the same stubborn determination that had made them answer Ember's cry in the first place. He asked them what they wanted to do, and one by one, they gave their answer. Grace said that she would not abandon Ember to die alone after everything they had been through together. Ben said that he had not spent a week fixing a dragon just to hand her over to butchers. Nathan said that he would rather die with his hands on the controls than live knowing he had run away when someone needed him. Lisa said that she had joined the crew of the Starboard Hope to see the wonders of the universe, and Ember was the greatest wonder she had ever seen, and she would not let that wonder be destroyed. Jack nodded, and he felt proud to serve with such brave people, and he knew what he had to do, even though it might cost them everything. Walked to the communications console, and he opened a channel on every frequency that human vessels might be monitoring. And he began to speak. He told them about the signal they had found in the cold of space and the creature who had made it. And he told them the true history of the Star Dragons and the genocide that the galaxy had tried to forget. And he told them that Ember was gentle and kind, and that she had never hurt anyone, and that she deserved to live. He said that the Korvathi were coming to finish what they had started centuries ago, and that the Starboard Hope was just a cargo vessel with no weapons and no way to escape. And he asked if there was anyone out there who would stand with them. The hour passed slowly, and the Korvathi warships drew closer, and Jack began to think that his message had been heard by no one, or that those who heard it had chosen not to respond. And then Lisa's console began to light up with incoming signals. The first ship to arrive was a mining vessel called the Iron promise, and its captain said that she had lost her brother to injustice, and she would not stand by while another innocent creature was murdered. The second ship was a cargo hauler called the Lucky Star, and its pilot was an old man who said that he had lived long enough to know when something was wrong, and this was wrong. More ships came, and they were cargo haulers, and mining vessels, and private yachts, and passenger transports, and science vessels, and exploration ships. And none of them were warships, and none of them had weapons that could match the Korvathi, but they came anyway. They positioned themselves between the Korvathi battle group and the starward, hoping they formed a wall of human vessels that stretched across the darkness of Space. Commander Vexnar hailed them again, and his voice was no longer calm, and there was confusion and anger in his words as he demanded to know what they were doing. Jack told him that they were protecting one of their own. Vexnar said that the creature was not human and had no right to human protection. A new voice came over the communications channel, and it belonged to Captain Amy Liu of the Human Colonial Defense Force frigate Resolute. And she said that humanity had decided to extend its protection to Ember, Starfire of the Jalvine, and that any attack on her would be considered an attack on humanity itself. A Korvathi commander was silent for a long moment, and then he said that they were risking war with the Korvathi Empire and the entire Galactic Council for the sake of one creature. Jack replied with the words that would be remembered for generations to come. He said that she asked for help, and no one else answered. The standoff continued as more human ships arrived, and the Korvathi warships held their position, and the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And somewhere in the cargo bay of the Starward Hope, a star dragon wept tears of liquid gold because she had finally found something she thought was lost forever. She had found a family. The standoff lasted for 3 days and 3 nights as the human vessels held their position and the Korvathi warships waited for orders from their high command. And the tension in the void was so thick that it seemed like the stars themselves were holding their breath. Jack barely slept during those long hours, and he spent most of his time on the bridge watching the enemy ships and waiting for the weapons fire that could end everything in a flash of light. But the attack never came because even the Korvathi could not ignore what was happening. Word of the standoff had spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, and the news networks on 1,000 worlds were broadcasting images of the human fleet and telling the story of the Star Dragon and the cargo ship that had refused to abandon her. The Galactic Council received millions of messages from species who had believed the Jalvine were monsters and were now learning the truth for the first time. And the political pressure grew with every passing hour until the Council had no choice but to intervene. A diplomatic vessel arrived on the second day, and a representative of the Council came aboard the Starward Hope to speak with Captain Morrison and to see the creature that had caused such chaos. The representative was a Selvari named Kethros, and he was old and tired, and he had served on the Council for longer than most humans had been alive. And he looked at Ember with eyes that held both fear and wonder. Jack introduced them, and Ember lowered her great head so that she could look at Kethros directly, and her scales glowed with soft colors that spoke of peace and patience and a willingness to understand. Kethros asked Jack why humanity had chosen to risk so much for a creature that was not their own, and Jack gave him the same answer he had given. Commander Vexnar said that she asked for help, and no one else answered. The Selvari was silent for a long time, and then he asked to touch Ember's scales so that he could see for himself what kind of being she truly was. And Ember agreed when Kethros pulled his hand away. There were tears in his ancient eyes, and he said that he had been wrong, and that his people had been wrong, and that the Council had committed a terrible crime 3 centuries ago, and had been lying about it ever since he returned to his ship. And he contacted the Council, and he told them what he had seen and felt. and the negotiations began in earnest. The talks were difficult because the Corvathi did not want to admit that they had hunted an innocent species to near extinction, and they demanded that the humans hand over Ember so that they could study her and determine if she was truly harmless. Captain Amy Liu told them that Ember was under human protection and that she would not be handed over to anyone for any reason. And the other human captains agreed with voices that left no room for compromise. The council offered deals and threats and warnings, but the humans would not budge. And finally, on the third day, a decision was reached. The extermination order against the Gelvine was officially rescinded, and Ember was declared a protected being under the joint guardianship of the Human Colonial Federation, and any attempt to harm her would be treated as an act of war against humanity. The Kovathi battle group withdrew from the system, and Commander Vexenar sent one final message to Jack Morrison before he left. He said that the humans had made powerful enemies this day, and that the galaxy would not forget what had happened here. Jack replied that he hoped the galaxy would remember exactly what had happened here, because it was a lesson that everyone needed to learn. The human vessels dispersed slowly over the following days, and each captain said goodbye to Ember before they left, and many of them touched her scales and shared their memories with her so that she would never forget the family she had found among the pond. Stars Grace's daughter sent a video message telling Ember that she was the bravest and most beautiful dragon in the whole universe, and that she hoped they would meet in person someday. Ember watched the message over and over again, and her scales glowed with happiness. Each time the starward hope remained in the Vela expanse for another week while Ember's wounds finished healing, and while the crew helped her prepare for the journey ahead. On the last night before she left, Ember gathered the crew in the cargo bay, and she shared something with them that she had never shared with anyone before. She showed them the locations of hidden places scattered across the Reisvasta galaxy where other creatures like her might still be sleeping. And she said that she had protected these secrets for centuries because she was afraid of what would happen if anyone found them, but she trusted the humans now, and she wanted them to know because she believed that they would protect her people the way they had protected her. Jack promised that he would keep her secret safe, and that when the time was right, he would help her find the others and bring them home. Grace gave Ember a small device that contained photographs and videos and messages from the crew, and she said that Ember should look at it whenever she felt lonely and remember that she had friends who loved. Urban gave her a radio beacon that he had built himself, and he said that it would broadcast a signal that any human vessel would recognize, and if she ever needed help, she should turn it on, and someone would come. Lisa gave her a recording of all the music that Ben had played during her recovery, and she said that it was a gift from humanity to help her remember the joy she had found among them. Nathan gave her a star chart that showed the constellations as seen from Earth, and he said that no matter where she went in the universe, she could look at these patterns and think of the small blue planet where her friends had been born. Ember accepted each gift with gratitude and love, and she promised that she would never forget what they had done for her. When the time came for her to leave, the cargo bay doors opened, and Ember spread her wings for the first time since the crew had found her. And they were magnificent and vast, and they caught the light of distant stars and scattered it into 1,000 colors. She turned to look at the tiny humans who had saved her life, and she made a sound that needed no translation because it was the sound of pure love and gratitude and hope. And then she flew. The crew of the Starward Hope watched as Ember soared through the darkness of space and grew smaller and smaller until she was just another star among the billions. and they knew that they had done something that would be remembered long after they were gone. Jack returned to his routine cargo runs, but the universe was different now, and word spread among the stars of the species that had answered a cry in the cold of space when no one else would. Voices began to reach out from the darkness, and other creatures who had been hiding and suffering and hoping began to send their own signals into the void, and humanity answered them all, because that is what humans do. That is who humans are, and the galaxy would never be the same again.